Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Star Wars Tales of the Jedi. So straight away, for anyone wondering about Andor, since I didn't review episode 7 last week, I wasn't able to record one last week, so either later on today or tomorrow I'll have a review for Andor episode 7 and 8 together. So it's just a kind of unfortunate thing where I happened to miss the episode right before the week where there was 2 Star Wars things. So, Tales of the Jedi. Interesting format for a series. I was looking forward to it, and we got all the episodes at once. I did only realize, actually, like, relatively, like, just before it was due to come out, that, okay, they're not full-length episodes. Not every single one of these is 22 minutes. In fact, I don't think any of them are. Yeah, looking at the list here, you can see that, like, yeah, like the 19, 16 minutes, 16 minutes, 18, 13, and 17, I think, as well. So you get about sort of 50 minutes with Ahsoka, 50 minutes with Dooku, roughly, and that's what this series is. Interestingly, it seems to be in rough chronological order. I think that's the only thing that can really explain why the Ahsoka episodes are kind of distributed across the 6 episodes like they are. 1, 5, and 6. I think that's the only real way to explain it. I don't really see why there was a need to do that. I think they probably should have just done it where it's like, okay, Ahsoka's up first, 1, 2, 3, Dooku's second, 4, 5, 6. But it doesn't really matter for the most part. In general, I really liked it. But I will say there, I think, is a little bit of a gulf in quality between the Ahsoka stuff and the Dooku stuff. I think the Ahsoka stuff is a little scattered, not particularly connected, linked together in the exact way that you would maybe want them to, in that, okay, I appreciate getting a kind of young, you know, birth of Ahsoka episode, but it's like the longest episode and I don't really get what it was exactly trying to accomplish necessarily. I get it, like, the core point is Ahsoka ends up being Force sensitive. But to me, not including, like, Plo Koon coming and, like, meeting her for the first time was a little bit of a kind of weird one for me. I think you kind of needed that to justify why you had it there. Otherwise, it just feels a little bit like, okay, I appreciate getting to know, like, Ahsoka's mother, father, her village a little bit, but I don't think it accomplished, like, that much. Then you have the second Ahsoka episode, which is episode 5, which is arguably, I think, the best of the 3 Ahsoka episodes, even though it's, like, the most sort of, like, in a way, like, niche, kind of very laser focused on one very specific thing. And it's just Ahsoka's, like, blaster deflection training and how Anakin pushing her to train in this ultimately sort of, like, saves her life when Order 66 happens. I thought, like, it was a cool way to do it. It's the shortest episode, so I think it sort of, like, uses its time the best and has what feels like one of the better moments in the Ahsoka side of the episode, which is Anakin just telling Ahsoka that, like, the reason I'm putting you through this is because the only thing I can really, like, give you, basically, is the ability to, like, protect yourself, and that's exactly what he does. Otherwise, you know, it was nice. We got to see some nice action, some nice animation of the kind of sequences of blaster blocking, which was quite good. But, you know, still very weird in a way to have a full episode focused on just blaster deflection training, basically. Then the last episode, episode 6 for Ahsoka, was weird. I think it mainly, to me, came across weird because I have read that Ahsoka book, and so seeing them, like, I don't even know if you can call this a proper adaptation. They showed, like, a couple of scenes that happened to basically be out of that book, but it didn't really feel like they were trying to do an adaptation other than generally this is how things actually go. In that, okay, she has a fight with an Inquisitor. She is otherwise interacting with farmers, and then they added in a few little extra kind of bits, like, oh, she goes to Padme's funeral, a little scene at the start. She meets up with Bail Organa to get the communicator to explain how she ultimately helps those farmers when she kills the Inquisitor. But overall, it was very kind of quick, and it was like, I found it interesting how little I ended up particularly like feeling or caring that much about that last episode. Which is why I say it was a bit weird that the Blasted Reflection episode for the Ahsoka side of things, to me, ended up being the best. I appreciate why they chose to do Ahsoka in this, and I think, you know, individually, these 3 little episodes were worth getting. It's just, if Tales of the Jedi, I think, covered like more Jedi, like if there was like 12 episodes, or like it was a full anthology thing that had loads of hours of content, this I think would feel a lot better being like 1 of 5. But being 1 of 2, especially when the Dooku episodes were so much I think more focused, they filled in better gaps, a character where I think like we needed those gaps filled in a little bit more. It just ended up feeling a little bit maybe superfluous for kind of Ahsoka to get like this much focus. Now, if you haven't read the novel, I suppose you're going to like that maybe connects a few dots, but I do come out of it feeling like, what way do you view that Ahsoka book? Because it's one of the relatively earlier Disney canon books, so it is canon, but it has sort of been retconned now by aspects of the Clone Wars. It has been retconned now by this show. It feels like there's a real sense for like, we don't really kind of care in a way. Now, maybe that's just a case where it obviously came out at a time when it felt like the Clone Wars was done and they weren't going to come back to it. Then all of a sudden, Disney kind of in a way realized that, wait, Ahsoka, Clone Wars style stuff is actually some of the best stuff that we had, and it got a massive resurgence. And all of a sudden, the fact that they'd adapted it as a book ahead of time is just maybe a thing where like, okay, in this case we actually ended up doing 2 important content in the book, let's do it our own way. I'm relatively okay with that in this like specific instance. I wouldn't want to see them adapt other books and not treat it as well as they kind of have here. But yeah, that's my general thoughts on the Ahsoka side of things, of just 3 individually I think solid things that I just didn't really feel much kind of connection between them other than just like Ahsoka in general. Whereas on the other side of things, the Dooku stuff I thought was brilliant, like start to finish. Seeing like him with Qui-Gon as a Padawan in a kind of, you know, Qui-Gon Obi-Wan style thing. That's what the kind of age kind of stuff kind of felt like, where Qui-Gon either already is a knight but is doing some final missions with Dooku, or is basically at that Obi-Wan point from Phantom Menace, which was a nice dynamic. Then seeing Dooku and Mace Windu team up in the 2nd episode was also quite good, because that's ultimately a key dynamic. They really seem to be positioning Mace Windu as being, he represents the kind of flaws of the Jedi Order. And then the 4th episode, which is the 3rd Dooku episode, was definitely, I think, the best of the bunch. Having one Yaddle focus to explain what happens to her between Phantom Menace and her not appearing in anything else, that was good. Seeing just some of those connective things, like him erasing the archive memory with Kamino, and then a massive confrontation, like Yaddle meets Sidious. Like, you know exactly what's going to happen to her, but it made the scene feel very impactful, knowing that everyone's not just going to get away and it'll get resolved itself. No, big stuff has to happen in this episode. And then, all the way through all 3 episodes, it's all about Dooku and how he feels about the Republic, the Senate, the Jedi, the Council, and what eventually causes him to go from being Jedi Master Dooku, you know, destined for the Council, to suddenly being a Jedi who not only leaves the Order, but becomes a Sith and wants to change things so badly he will join up with the guy causing a lot of the problems in the first place. And I thought they did a great job across all 3 episodes. So the core theme, especially in the first 2 episodes, is basically we have these 2 corrupt senators. So in the first episode, the idea is that a senator who is making such bad decisions that he has basically led his planet to ruin. Things look terrible, and it looks like a wasteland of a planet because of whatever way he's making decisions for this place. Nothing is actually benefiting the people. He looks like a full-on like wealthy senator, but it doesn't reflect at all what any of the people seem to be like. So we get this very interesting situation where the people kidnap the senator's son, but Dooku and Qui-Gon, when they meet up with them and immediately find out they're the kidnappers, are all like, oh, we kind of understand this, especially once they realize, okay, they're treating him relatively well. And even the son realizes that, okay, like, I don't want to be kidnapped, but I completely get why you would see this as the last straw. This is the last resort. This is all you can actually do to get through to the senator how bad things actually are. And Dooku just kind of realizing that, like, oh yeah, I have basically been sent on this mission to help basically a criminal. Like, because that's the way you sort of have to view it, is that the senator's actions have been so, like, negligent, it borders on kind of criminal. And the Jedi have been sent out to help this guy get his son back, all the time ignoring what he's actually done. And that's you know, defining of what Dooku is kind of thinking about throughout all of these episodes. So I actually really liked in this episode 2 Justice, that when the fight actually kicks off, I like the subtleties at play here. Sometimes there are fights in Star Wars shows where it feels like this is action for the sake of action. This time, even though like there wasn't anything fancy really going on here, I loved the intensity of this, that you just knew the stakes were high here, that you don't want kind of anyone to die, basically, because, okay, the senator is the one fundamentally at fault here, but the Jedi can't really just attack and kill these guards because they are effectively on the same side. Like, everyone is in essence on the same side here. It's just that the senator is not changing his mind because he's the one in power. And then the Jedi don't, at least initially, feel like they can't really act against him as such. So seeing Dooku decide to side with the people was a big move. And then seeing him just get more and more furious at the senator as it becomes clear that he just doesn't care. The force choke scene, him tossing Qui-Gon away when Qui-Gon tries to stop him. And I like that Qui-Gon does ultimately resolve the situation as well by freeing the senator's son and being aware that the senator's son will cool off the situation just by him being freed. And then the senator's son seems like someone who will actually change things going forward. So a little bit of hope just there at the end, but you don't really know how exactly it resolves itself. And then I like that even though Dooku has this dark moment, the ending is sort of, you know, like, Qui-Gon, like, you're a wiser Jedi than I am. Very much similar to the way Qui-Gon says about Obi-Wan in The Phantom Menace. And again, just showing you, this is an important relationship for Dooku. Qui-Gon, the potential he sees in Qui-Gon, and that they're both sort of like more individual thinkers within the Jedi, which he seems to value a lot. And he sees such potential for Qui-Gon. It's great to see. The third episode here, Choices, second one for Dooku. Interesting. Obviously, Dooku and Windu is an interesting pairing because, of course, you mainly get it from the sort of Phantom Menace kind of dynamic, that you get the sense where, like, these are sort of equivalent level Jedis. One represents, like, you know, everything wrong with it, and one is sort of like criticizing everything wrong with it, and it's just sort of the kind of same position but from sort of like different angles. And you see that straight away. They more do it where like Dooku is the rebel who will go against orders. Mace Windu sticks to the rules. And then they introduce at the end of the episode this kind of like twist that like, oh, this is where Mace Windu gets his council seat. And this seems to cause a bit of tension because Dooku doesn't like that the council seem very much almost like run by the Senate almost, and that they're not questioning things enough, and now Mace Windu is becoming part of it, and he doesn't exactly seem like the guy who's going to rock the boat and change things, whereas Dooku kind of does want to change things. The senator in this one, they reveal at the end, like after he's killed, that he was corrupt because he was basically stealing money from the planet, and that the actual like villains of the piece are the guards who kill the Jedi that they've gone there to get the body back, because she's just there guarding the senator. So they just get her out of the way so they can have control over the senator, and this is kind of what causes the issue. Now, it's an interesting one where Windu just kind of wants to go in there, get the body out, and if an obvious investigation point comes up, I guess he'll go along with it. Dooku more wants to actively investigate, and by the end of the episode, they kind of frame it as Dooku was like too eager to want to investigate, and he kind of got the senator killed. It's an interesting kind of perspective on it, again, of just like, was he wrong to be so active on this, or was Mace Windu in the right to just do what they were there for and nothing else? But that approach represents what Dooku really doesn't like at all, that they are there not to help the people as such, they're just there to get a body back, but they could help people if they just did something. And it's an interesting approach overall, and you can see some of the tensions coming in at the end once Dooku kind of realizes that maybe the whole Windu on the council thing was organized beforehand and that sort of stuff. But interesting. I definitely say the third episode, the Sith Lord, was the best for on Dooku's side of things, then Justice, and then this middle one was probably the weakest of the Dooku ones, but it was still very, very good. And that obviously leads us into Sith Lord, which I just thought was fantastic because, one, we get Yaddle content, and for like one of the few times like ever, I think she's in the High Republic a little bit, but hasn't really been a focus. Straight away, I suppose, just on the Yaddle thing, she speaks normally. And this is interesting because it obviously speaks to the idea that the way Yoda speaks is not just how the species speaks. That is obviously unique to Yoda, given that Yaddle can just talk completely normally here. So that's an interesting one to see if they ever kind of reveal why Yoda speaks that way. But it was also nice to kind of see this dynamic. It is the sort of Dooku and Yaddle episode, but it's also the one most heavily interlinked with the Phantom Menace. That you almost forget things like this, that in between episode 1 and 2, Yaddle is suddenly gone. Dooku was a Jedi still during the events of the Phantom Menace, and here we see kind of what was going on. I think this is where it maybe highlights that, if at all possible, I think adding in 1 or 2 more, maybe even just the full thing being about Dooku, probably should have been perhaps the way to go, because I think there is still a lot of Dooku stuff that it's kind of really hard to place in the timeline if you haven't recently read and are super familiar with all the details from, say, like Dooku Jedi Lost or other canon sources of information on Dooku. Because I think this is meant to be set at a time period for Dooku where he has moved away from being like properly active as a Jedi, but he hasn't like fully like burnt all of those bridges. So this is after I think a lot of stuff has happened, which is why on this episode I think it's talked about the idea that Dooku isn't on the council anymore, and hence why Yaddle says that, like, oh, I've also left my role on the council because I agree with aspects of kind of what you're talking about. Giving a little bit more context to that stuff, I think, might have helped little bits and pieces here. But I still think what came across very nicely in this one was that Qui-Gon connection. Him hearing that Qui-Gon has encountered a Sith Lord. And it's after they kind of are a little bit questioning of that. They don't quite believe it. And he obviously does. And you can see when they talk, they still get on really, really well. And he, again, is so proud of Qui-Gon. That comes across really well. And so when you then cut to, you don't even, it's so sudden. Qui-Gon has died and he's already heard that report. And he talks about Qui-Gon and this tree, and that Qui-Gon's from Coruscant. So this organic tree being present on the planet is an interesting thing. And Yaddle is there speaking to him, sensing that there is something very, very wrong. And so she follows him when he makes his move. Then you have to remember, earlier on in the episode, we saw him erase Kamino from the Jedi Temple archive, which was a nice little touch to highlight that this is around the time when he's doing that stuff, without being super open about it. So there's still some secrets that have to be kept here. But yeah, getting the moment where Yaddle just comes out and flat out confronts Dooku talking to Sidious is pretty crazy, because you know it's her sealing her fate completely. If she had left before she properly saw what was going on here, you could have done something else with Yaddle. But this is her sealing her fate. You know she can't get away with this information. It just can't happen. And so this is meant to be sort of the last act of, prove to me you are a Sith Lord. Kill her. All the time while Yaddle is trying to convince him to come back to the light, but he feels he's too far gone. Too much has happened. And there's the sense where it's like, is it a lot of this informed by the grief over Qui-Gon's death and how the council not fully agreeing with him, supporting him and all that stuff has potentially led to some of this stuff happening? That's what's so interesting. That he would actually go and, you know, side with effectively the person who kind of got him killed. And that is the interesting part about Dooku, is that you completely understand why he has all of these doubts, but then when it comes to the really hardcore specifics of the situation, there are those points of just like, if you're so worried about corruption, why is it the guy manipulating the Senate that you're siding with? Why is it the guy that technically got Qui-Gon killed that you're siding with over the people who supported him? It's just that thing of like, in the middle of all of this, Dooku did become lost, and that's the kind of tragedy of this. As for the way the action went, I like that they highlighted that Yaddle's style is similar to Yoda's, but not exactly the same. She doesn't tend to be as aggressive with the flipping, but still does it to make up for her size. But it's clear Dooku, of course, as the dueling expert, has the advantage, pushes her back, and you think he takes her out by crushing her with a hangar door. It was pretty crazy. She makes her kind of come back, lifts the door up, but she's spent after that. Final conversation, and he just executes her. I like it because this is what had to happen in terms of a big moment for him, sort of like sealing what side he's going to be on, that there really isn't a turning point for him once he does this. And he goes ahead and does it, and Sidious is laughing. So again, does it cover every aspect of Dooku? No, perhaps not. But I think in terms of getting you talking about the key points with Dooku as a character, it absolutely accomplishes most of what it needs to do. So in terms of like overall thoughts, like I said, I thought the Ahsoka 3 episodes were a bit disjointed, to the point where like I don't know if you quite needed to do Ahsoka as the other character in this. I get it, she's super popular. She in a way represents this animation style, the Dave Filoni stuff, really well, so why wouldn't you do that? But I'm also aware that like soon enough we'll have an Ahsoka TV show. So is this just the final bit of like this era of Ahsoka that we needed? Fair enough if that's the case, but I think there were slight issues just with regards to like, why did you choose to do that? Why did you choose to do that? In that the longest episode being the Baby Ahsoka one felt a bit weird, given that they didn't fully connect it to the other bits. The shortest episode arguably being the best for her was a bit of a weird choice as well. And then I did come out of the adaptation of the novel feeling just a little bit like, you didn't fully do it enough, and it was like, what's this about? But the Dooku stuff I think more than made up for it. Again, I hope going forward they make the decision to do more of this. I think this being done for other characters, whether they be other Jedi or other Sith, would be very, very interesting. Like Ki-Adi-Mundi, I'd like to see kind of more on him. Like just stuff like that. I think Mace Windu probably comes out of this feeling like, I think you need to add some nuance to that character, so he's not just the strict rules guy who represents everything wrong with the Jedi Council. I think if you know more about him, you know he's not fully like that. There is more to him, but you need to show us a bit more of that, and that's why I think he's probably a good candidate to do one of these with. And then other stuff like, say, Darth Plagueis. If you don't have a plan to ever incorporate him into anything, why not do a kind of anthology style thing like this to tell his story, given how important it actually is? Those are the sort of things I would like to see going forward, and that I feel you probably have told most of the Clone Wars arcs that you need to, outside of maybe probably like the Darth Maul, son of Dathomir. I'd like to see that get, you know, animated at some point. The Dark Disciple stuff, I would like to see that get animated. And then beyond that, it probably is just anthology stuff that touches in or around Clone Wars stuff, but is mainly about like prequel stuff, I think. And then bring High Republic into things a little bit. I think they could theoretically use Tales of the Jedi to do some High Republic stuff as well. So I hope we see this continue. Like Star Wars Visions, I think we know we're getting more of that. I'd like to see the same done here, because I think people love this animation style, this approach to storytelling. It'd be a shame if this was the last we ever got of it. But yeah, so in general, good. Just a little bit maybe more of a mixed bag than I was expecting, but overall really, really good. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on Tales of the Jedi. Otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.